Right, let's see if I can get this up here. Get myself sorted. Live. Here we go. Right, that link should be with you on the chat now. This is a new one.
Looking for it. Okay. Sorry, that's the old one.
Yeah, so it's the latest one. I just put in the comments there. You should see on this Skype chat.
Let's see if we're not working. Control. There we go. Something's happening.
Yep. Let me see what you can see when you see it.
Got a picture.
Yep.
Any second when I see the picture, I'll bin the... Now that should be muted. Are you okay muted?
Yep, I'm getting no feedback from you, which is great. Hiya, Mike, in the comments there. Can you see the first comment that came in black?
Hang on, let me just move. I'm going to have to move. I've got Hakan Feldman. What's the weather like?
Yeah, and the one above that was from MKMD Exploration and Paranormal. Right.
MKMD Exploration and Paranormal. Hi, guys. Okay?
Perfect. So again, for everyone who's joining us at the moment, bear with me because it takes, as you know, a couple of minutes for me to get this link out to social media, and we will start the Q&A. But while we do that, Black, what's been going on your end since we last talked? Because it's been a couple of weeks now, a good couple of weeks.
Well, the big news, Mike, is that I've just signed a contract for my next book, which I'm delighted about.
Oh, brilliant.
And that's mainly about father. In fact, it's all about father.
All about your father.
All you get from me is 7 pounds 14 ounces on the 22nd of February 1945.
Such a modest man.
I think it's better without me.
No, well, you've got some great stories, as you know, of the guys in the comments here, and people who are joining us are going to know because, I mean, incredible. From your latest book, I should mention here, bear with us, guys. Fighters in the Blood. How's that being taken? Have you got some great reviews or anything yet?
I've had some good reviews. I have, Mike. Yeah, I'm pleased about that. I've no idea how it's selling. I mean, I'm not by any means one of the top sellers. It seems to be going up more on Kindle than it is on hard copies. Okay. And it's doing reasonably well in the States too, so I'm quite pleased by that.
Brilliant. So I'm just getting this out as we speak. Bear with us, Black, and everyone in the comments. As you know, it takes a couple of minutes, which is a bit of a faff, but it should be a great Q&A because I've had some great feedback also from your 2-part interview. It's been incredible, and people seem to love your stories, which is always nice to hear. Right. Right, let's see if this is coming out here on my side. Let's see if I can get it out to our patrons. If there's any of our patrons in, thank you for joining us. Publish now. Right. Again, Black, it takes about five or so months before we get everyone coming in, but while we get the viewers coming in, could you maybe tell us a bit about your background and, what you flew and where we are today with yourself? That'd be great.
Where we are today is I'm semi-retired writing books, but my flying career started off on Jet Provost. Well, Chipmunks, first of all, then Jet Provost. So I went from Jet Provost to the Gnat, a really tiny aeroplane, which you almost strapped yourself into a thimble to fly it. From the Gnat to the Hunter, from the Hunter to the Phantom, and I spent probably more than 2,500 hours on the Phantom. And then as I got to be a really old guy, I was allowed to fly all sorts of other things. And one of the most challenging things I ever had to do, I think, was to learn to fly helicopters. And there's a story or two there, but a hell of a lot more difficult than I imagined.
Yeah, because like just going back a bit while the questions coming in, you had that picture with you in the Jag. Was that your only flight in the Jag?
It was my only flight in the Jag. I really wanted to experience what it was like because it was the one frontline airplane I hadn't flown. The guys who fly it love it, but it was new to me, and I was just a great experience to fly it. It's a bit like the one-off trips I did in F-15s and in the Gripen.
Yeah, the Gripen was an amazing story because I've had a few comments and saying like, "Oh, did he fly the Gripen?" Because obviously your model in the background, but
Yeah.
hopefully they heard it in the part two. But while I get the questions coming on social media, as you can see, there's a few coming in on the right of the comment box there, Black. So I'm going to let you take it away. And if you need me at any time, just give me a shout. But guys, get your questions coming in, and it's going to be a great Q&A. So Black, enjoy.
Okay. The first one, I'm probably going to get rid of Hakan Feldman's one. First of all, what's the weather like? I've no idea. I'm stuck in my study and it's dark outside, but been a lot warmer today than it has been for the rest of this month. Right, looking at the first really important one there, it's from Sajid Lal. I may not have read that properly, but forgive me if I did. Was sitting side by side in the training hunter better than sitting behind the pilot in another aircraft? The thing about sitting side by side, it feels more intimate. The guy can almost look at you when you fly side by side. But the nice thing about flying in tandem is you really do feel, particularly if you're in the front seat learning, you feel it's your aeroplane. You feel you are on your own. So given a choice, I think I'd rather fly one behind the other as someone learning. And maybe if I were teaching, I'd probably prefer side by side. I hope that answers the first question. Okay. Kevin Houghton, Mike Child, ex-Hawk demo pilot. No, I never did that. The only displays I've ever done were in the F4 with my team on 92 Squadron. Well, I should say the team. I just happened to be the leader. Back to Sajid Lal. Were the RAF hunters ever equipped with air-to-air missiles? Do you know, that's a really good question. I think I may have seen the odd picture with a missile, but I don't recall them ever being used, as far as the RAF was concerned, as a formal weapon fit. Rockets, 4 cannons, and that was about it, really. Right, Jim Zhang, while training in F4C and UK F4, were you trained in vertical maneuvers such as high yo-yos to maximize the thrust-to-weight ratio of the F4 Phantom versus aircraft with a superior turn rate? Yeah, good question again. I think in any airplane, not just the F4, when you're fighting another airplane, using the vertical is a really good way to get what appears to be a better turn. If you imagine turning horizontally, your turn radius, I think, is less than if you go up, rather like someone going up the wall of Death Rider. You go up and then come back down again. It feels, and I think it's true, that you turn through more degrees than you would if you just turned in the horizontal. So yeah, using the high yo-yo was a really what was called a BFM, a basic fighter maneuver. Okay, Bill. How did the Phantom fly compared to old Cold War jets like the Hunter? Was it more pleasant? Lots of ways of answering that question. Very little is more pleasant than flying the Hunter, is my first point. The thing about the Phantom was, and I mentioned this when I did my interviews with Mike, you felt you were in a drawing room in a large armchair by comparison with flying the Hunter. There's so much more room inside the Phantom. So old Cold War jets, as you call them, like the Hunter, it felt a more intimate relationship with the airplane. Even more so, in fact, when you flew something like the Gnat, which was so small. So I think those of us who flew single seaters, like the Hunters and the Nat, when you were alone in the front seat, it felt more pleasant. It always feels more pleasant, I think, particularly when you're learning to be on your own. So I hope that's a decent answer to that question. Right, MKMD, Exploration and Paranormal. Can you go more into the Jag and F4 story, please? Ah, you mean when I commanded the squadron that was the highest scoring fighter outfit since World War II? Yeah. That's going to take me a moment. I'll be as quick as I can. It was at the end of what's called a Maxival, which was a 3-day, very tough exercise to prepare squadrons for Takival. And at the end of 3 days of hard work, people are tired, mistakes get made. That's why you work so hard during that period, to stretch it out for 3 days, as a Takival would be. And right at the end, you sometimes did what was called a launch. So you loaded the airplanes up with live missiles at the end of the day, or end of the exercise. You then launched the aircraft for what was called a survival scramble. We didn't always do that, but it was the ultimate test. You worked hard for 3 days, the airplanes are stood up to the test, you've armed them up, and you get airborne. Now, what you have to do under those conditions, when you've got live weapons on board, is put a piece of tape, cross a piece of white tape over the master arm switch, as it were, the final link in the chain before you pull the trigger, so that you're reminded that that airplane is live. This was one of the things that wasn't done on that particular airplane. I touched on the fact that at the end of 3 days, people are tired, they make mistakes. This is one of the mistakes. So these guys get airborne with live missiles. They do their sortie, they come back, and at the end of the sortie, what happened was a target of opportunity rose in front of them. Now, a target of opportunity is one that you lock onto with the radar. You run through all the gubbins you would normally do to release a missile, because the more you practice that, the better you are at it. So we did that almost on every sortie. Anytime you found a target, you locked on, it was within range, you got within range, you got a growl from a missile if it was a test missile or a dummy missile. So these guys did this. There was this Jaguar which appeared in front of them as they were recovering back to Wildenrath. And they went through all the switches, right through to master arm on, pull the trigger. Now, I mentioned that that tape wasn't over the master arm, so there's a problem. The guy had put the master arm on when it shouldn't have been on. Then he pulled the trigger, and no one was more surprised than him, other than perhaps the Jaguar pilot, Steve Griggs, that off came the missile and hit the Jaguar. So it was a combination of Murphy's, all the things that could have gone wrong. I hope that answers your question. I don't want to make it too long, otherwise I'm going to drag out the time and miss other questions. I hope that that's a decent answer. Come back to me if it isn't. Okay, Hakan again. Most Swedish pilots have not flown other fighter aircraft. How does the Gripen stack up? It's a beautiful aeroplane. In 2 or 3 ways. It's a beautiful design. It's got a very good power to weight ratio. And electronically, I always felt, ahead of its time. It was possible to link with other airplanes and work as part of a sort of a defensive system. So the electronics were good. The displays were excellent. It handled beautifully. It's really, I suppose, it's a bit like, do you like cars? Are cars attractive? Do they drive well? Do they get ticks in all the boxes? The Gripen got all the ticks in the boxes as far as I was concerned. Nice guy flew with me, and I was very pro the aeroplane. When I worked for BAE, I made the point to both South Africa and some people in Brazil that I thought was a hell of a good aeroplane. And I think most of all, it was a cost-effective aeroplane. Okay. Sajid Lal again. How did the Nat turn in a dogfight as compared to the Hunter? Tighter, I think. It had a phenomenal roll rate. So you could snap into a turn by putting on the bank quicker than any other airplane I've ever flown. It turned very tightly. I never did a dogfight between a Nat and a Hunter, so I can't compare the two. I felt it turned very tightly. The interesting thing about it is, if you were doing a dogfight between a Nat and a Hunter, and they both, perhaps two of them came towards you, you would see the hunter before you'd see the gnat because the gnat was so small. And that was almost its greatest advantage. And I know it was used in the India-Pakistan conflicts way, way back. So I think the best person to answer that is probably an Indian or a Pakistani who's been on the wrong end of a hunter or a gnat dogfight. Sorry, I can't go further on that. Xinjiang, can you explain the challenges of how low-level interception in RAF Germany, such as performance of radar against low-level targets, weather and airspace challenges? Okay, I'll take the last one first. The airspace challenges at low level are not ones in terms of vertical extent, because you could climb up from low level to about 19,000 feet without infringing airspace. The airspace challenge was to avoid towns. 4 F4s fighting 4 Harriers at low level make an enormous amount of noise. So the more we flew at low level against low level targets, the more towns had little red dots put over them, so we had to avoid them. So that was the real airspace challenge. We had a look-down radar, which was very good against low-level targets. So that was a bonus to us. The most interesting thing about your points there is the weather question. I've flown in all sorts of weathers, and I found the weather in Germany some of the most demanding I ever flew with. But the advantage was you knew there weren't, in northern Germany where we flew, too many hills around, not too many hard clouds. Doing the same thing in Scotland, you've got to be much more wary of the ups and downs of valleys and mountains. But against low-level targets, once you'd found them, the weather in Germany could get very grey. You'd get mist, you'd get low cloud, and you'd get bogged in with not too much wind, so the weather would stay around for some time. I hope that answers your question, Zin. You've got another one here straight afterwards. Did I ever get vertigo flying with instruments at night in bad weather in the Phantom? No, once in the Hunter, I got a dose of not believing my instruments. It wasn't vertigo, but you just have to tell yourself, although you feel you're turning, you're actually not turning. You've got to believe the instruments. Right, Sajid Lalagam, what's your opinion on the performance of Nats and Hunters of the Indian Air Force against the F-86 Sabres of the Pakistan Air Force? I'm not an expert. I've never flown the Sabre. I think I probably would have liked to have flown my favorite airplane, the Hunter, but given that the Sabre had swept wings, I think there might have been advantages the Sabre had. The only thing I can say is that any Indian or Pakistan pilot taking part in those conflicts, they earn their spurs. Fighting one airplane against another when they're live armed and you could lose your life, not just your airplane, you have to take your hat off to people. Right, one more from Sajid Lal, then I'm going to go whip up to the top and make sure I'm not missing too many questions. Out of the 3 Canard Deltas, the Eurofighter, the Rafale, and the Gripen, what's your favorite and why? Okay. I love the Rafale as an elegant airplane. I love French design. I've got a lot of time for the French engineers too. I think it's a better looking airplane than the Eurofighter. I'll probably get shot by my friends in BAE for that. The Gripen, I think the Gripen's performance is probably less than the Rafale and the Eurofighter. I think overall, if I had to fight one of those 3, I would want to fight inside a Eurofighter against the other 2. I think that would be my best chances of survival. It may not be a great answer, but it's the best I can give. Right, Zhenjiang, how would you describe the flight characteristics of the Sea Fury? Oh, you're on my favorite airplane. Let me tell you a brief story as to what I learned about flying the Sea Fury. Chap I was with said at 10,000 feet, what we'll do is we'll fly a circuit as if you were actually going to land, but you're landing 10,000 feet high, not in an airfield. So what we did was to get up to 11,000 feet, start a gradual turn with the gear and the flaps down. And he said, what I want you to do is to turn in towards what is the runway on a heading of whatever it is, and assume that you are low on the glide path and you're actually going to land in the undershoot if you don't put on the power, and then whack on the power so you can get over the hedge at the end of the runway. I did this and I got the shock of my life because the aeroplane rotated around the propeller. There's just so much torque in an aeroplane like the Sea Fury, so much power in the engine that putting on huge power very late on when you're low level and you're low on speed, the airplane rotates around the prop. So that was the most exciting moment in the Sea Fury. The other flight characteristics, it handled beautifully, and anyone who's done nearly 400 knots in a piston engine airplane, it's just the most wonderful feeling. Right, I'm going to whip up to the top to make sure I'm not missing too many questions. Hang on a second. It's going to take me a moment just to get up there. Right. Okay, I'm okay on those. I think I've done those, so I'm going to keep on going down. Bear with me. Did I ever fly a Lightning? If so, how would you rate it against the Phantom? Right. I never flew the Lightning. It was phenomenally powerful. It would have outclimbed the Phantom, I think. I think it would have got higher. I think the weapon system in the Phantom was vastly superior. So if I had the two aeroplanes to choose from on a 1v1 fight, I would have gone for the Phantom every time. But you've got to take your hat off to an aeroplane that can climb the rate it did and get to the height it got to. I'm not sure it's the greatest answer, but it's the best I can give. One above, which other air forces did you train with? Oh, crikey. Italians, Germans, Americans, Brits, French. I've got a lot of time for the French. I flew the Mirage, and I flew also with the Australians or against the Australians. The French always impress me. I've touched already on the style with which they build their aeroplanes. They're elegant engineers, and they've got real spirit. And of all the air forces I've trained with and flown with, of the Europeans, I'd put the French closest to us in mindset and in terms of having fun with them. The Italians are also huge fun. And you've only got to look at the Frecce Tricolore, the way they demonstrate their 9-aeroplane team, and you'll realize how good they are. Right, Alexander Vatta, Spey or GE engines? What's your choice? Oh, lummy, very hard one. I've mentioned it before, but the only engine ever stopped on me was a J79. So on that count, I'd find the Spey more reliable. But short of actually stopping, the Spey gave you the odd problem occasionally. It made lots of bangs. If you got the engine up to too high an angle of attack and put too much power on too early, it would make an enormous bang and frighten the life out of you, but it didn't stop. I think the Spey was probably better in terms of its afterburner, its reheat, but it took 2 or 3 seconds to light, whereas the GE afterburner lit immediately. Very difficult question. I suppose if I were a Brit, I'd better say Spey, but I think on efficiency and on power and on overall reheat, I'd go for the Spey. Okay, the Freckle Puny, hi there, but there's no question. Okay, how fast could you scramble in a Hunter? This is from Sergeant Lally again. How fast could you scramble in a Hunter as compared to a Phantom? You'd get airborne faster in a Hunter. The Phantom took longer to wind up. When we were on QRA, we had 10 minutes from the moment the hooter went till the time we had to get airborne. And most of us could do that 10 minutes. And the 10 minutes took into account getting the hangar doors open, then taxiing to the end of the runway, which took a bit of time too. Whereas, you could sort of almost run to a hunter out in front of the pan. And we never stood, I never stood QRA, quick reaction alert, on a hunter. If you turn that into a which starts and gets ready to get airborne faster, I think it will be the hunter. Right. The Freckled Peony has now got a question up. Could the hunter have benefited from an afterburner and perhaps supersonic speed? Difficult question. Once you go supersonic, you have to have a slightly different aerodynamic design. I don't think you could have got much more out of a hunter with afterburner. I'll almost have nothing said ill against the hunter because I loved it so much. It would go transonic, and there are stories that it actually went supersonic in a dive. But I think the answer is probably no. It was, don't mess with something, don't fix it if it's not broke. The hunter wasn't broke. I wouldn't have fixed it with an afterburner. Right, Cody Stufer. I'm a current flight student in the US Navy. Any advice for a student aviator or flight school stories? Crummy. Oh, Cody, where do you start? Okay. I think the first thing I'd say is work hard. I wasn't very talented. Pretty early on, I learned something from what Cervantes wrote in Don Quixote. And it was something about what we translate into make your own luck. But it means the harder you work, the better you do. So the first thing I'd say is work hard. Learn everything you can about the aeroplane and do it before you get airborne so that you've got all the time in the cockpit to concentrate on flying the airplane and you're not worried about something else. Clear your mind of anything else while you're flying the airplane. There's no room for anything else while you're flying an airplane. Girlfriends, how much money you got in the bank, where the holiday is, forget it. Just think about flying the airplane. So work hard, concentrate hard, do what you're told. That may sound a bit fatherly, but that's a good piece of advice. Flight school stories, I've got hundreds of them. Where to start? Let me just find one that might amuse you. I'm having to scratch my head about this. I'll tell you one that really is unpleasant, but I'll tell you. When I first started, probably at the stage you're at, I had a lovely instructor. He was really a nice guy. He was a sergeant, a flight sergeant pilot, and I was a young cadet at Cranwell. And what he was trying to do was establish a good relationship with me. So he came and sat next to me in the crew room and talked me through the first sortie, or a particular sortie. And while he was doing that, it didn't smell too good. In those days, we had old blue gabardine flying suits. And if you flew in those a lot and they got all sweaty, and they do get, well, they used to get very sweaty because we didn't have air conditioning. There was quite an unpleasant smell next to me. So I moved away from him on the sofa. He moved up closer to me again. So I suppose the lesson from that is wash your flying suit regularly. It's not the best flight school story I can give you, but I hope it amuses you. Right. Where are we now? Did the British Phantom, I'm back to, did the British Phantom use the gun pod for air to ground? Absolutely. We did. The Vulcan was as good air to ground as it was air to air. He then says, which aircraft did you first fly a night mission in? First airplane I flew at night was in training, a jet Provost. There is something beautiful about night flying. None of us really liked it, but you sit there with a black night looking at spiders' webs of light, and it can be the most beautiful experience. Okay, that's night flying, not to be recommended in my book. I've done too much of it. Okay, did the RAF Phantom ever get an integral gun in the nose? No, it didn't. That's Bill. We never had the same thing as the F4E. Ours was always the Vulcan cannon, always strapped to the center line. Alexander Vetter, your experience, which CGI stations had the best fighter controllers? There's an interesting one. I'll tell you a story about Garter radar in Cyprus. I met my wife. She was a GCI instructor at Garter radar in Cyprus. And that was the first time I ever got behind a Lightning, because I had fuel left at the end of an air-to-air sortie. And she vectored me onto the back end of a Lightning. Who wasn't impressed to be caught at low level by an F4. I can't say she was the best or Garter was the best. I think it's easier to say who are the best controllers. And the best controllers are the calmest ones, who say the most with the least words. It's a bit like flying with somebody. If he can gain your confidence, even if it's a GCI controller or a GCA controller talking you down at night, how those words are put across, the speed with which the bloke talks, how they establish that essential rapport with you, that contributes to how good, or how, I won't say how bad, how good a controller someone is. Right, back to Xinjiang. As a flight instructor, do you believe that situational awareness and airmanship can be trained, or is it more of a natural gift that either a student pilot has or does not have? Wow. Airmanship is my big thing. What defines airmanship? So many factors. I think situational awareness is something you can learn, but there is definitely an individual out there who sees it faster than other people do. It's the same way, can you see what angle an aeroplane is at? Can you assess his energy state? Is his nose high? Has it been high for too long? Has he run out of energy? If you can see that, it's rather like arriving at a crossroads with cars coming the other way. Can you dart across, or have you got to stop? Maybe your mother doesn't do it as easily as you do. Maybe she sees things differently, and you say, "Whoa, don't turn now," or stop here. But she's really trying to press across the crossing because she hasn't seen the situation in the same way you have. So I believe that some people see things faster than others, but airmanship comprises other factors. Airmanship comprises good judgment. I'm not sure it can be trained. It can be learned through experience. Experience is the great teacher. Every mistake you make is one you should learn from, and other people should too. Never hide your mistakes. I felt this passionately. I learned from people who told me about the mistakes they made, and my fervent belief was that you tell other people what you've done wrong. Not just what you've done wrong, how you've done it wrong, why you've done it wrong, and examine the thought processes that took you to making that mistake. Maybe you can find out then why you made the mistake, but do pass it on to other people, and you never, ever stop learning about flying. Your flying total quotient is made up of two things. Stick and rudder skills, natural skill with the stick and rudder, and experience. The total of those two things goes on rising as you get older. But as you get older, your stick and rudder skills, that part of the graph, that drops off. So your reactions slow down. Your experience never drops off. You keep on gaining experience. Okay, I've talked about that for too long probably. Let's go on to Jude Mall, being local to Harden and having the chance to sit in one on a hangar tour. Have you got any stories you'd like to share about flying the Jet Provost? Jet Provost. Yeah, getting lost totally once. I talked about learning from your mistakes. I got totally lost once in the Jet Provost. It was a beautiful sight. There was nothing but white cloud on the ground. Basically, fog had come in. I had no idea where I was. But all I could see sticking out of the cloud was the top of a steeple. Now, luckily, very early on flying the Jet Provost, my instructor, the guy with a stinky flying suit, I'm afraid, showed me that church steeple. It's one of the highest in the country at Louth. And he said, remember that, that's Louth steeple. And it was about 40 odd miles from Cranwell. So being totally lost, seeing this thing sticking out of the top of this fog bank, I made the assumption, it's always a dangerous thing to do in an airplane, make an assumption. I made the assumption it was Louth Church. And then I took a heading from there. I knew where that was in relation to Cranwell. You had to head roughly south-west, I think, for Cranwell from there. And lo and behold, Cranwell turned up away from the fog. So that's the best story I can tell you about flying the Jet Provost. Just Dutch guy. Thanks for talking with us, sir. What do you think of the digital tools, optics, and data communication pilots have available now? I have trouble working a computer. I think what we demand more of our pilots now is digital dexterity, ability to handle things, multitask in the cockpit, using multiple fingers on multiple screens. I think that the pilot today, multitasking, learning from all the information, almost overload that's thrown at him, has a much, much more difficult job than we had. We lived in the golden era. You could get away with mistakes. You could even lose the odd airplane, and as long as it was reasonable, no one really, they minded, but they were always fair about it. I think now airplanes are so expensive and so complicated. If you lose one, it's billions down the drain, and we haven't got that many to lose. So I think I'd answer your question by saying that the digital presentations are now utterly brilliant and do help, particularly through the head-up display, the pilots of today. But I think that they still have a hell of a task in front of them, much more so than old farts like me did. Right. The freckled puny. Hunter, better as a fighter or a ground attacker? The latter, I think. They say that the best ground attack airplanes are those that transfer from the fighter role first of all. I'm not sure if that applies to the Eurofighter, but it certainly did in my view to the Hunter. It adapted to the ground attack role brilliantly. Because you could strap on so much by way of weaponry, underwing bombs, underwing rockets, and these four Aiden cannons. I mean, it shook the airplane to death when you fired all four together, 60 rounds in each. So I think it was better as a ground attack airplane. And I think that ground attack is the sport of kings. So I'll leave that question there. Back to Sergeant Lyle. Have you ever get the chance to escort the Vulcan? No, I didn't. So I can answer that very quickly. I'll move on. Mike Child. How do the F4C feel to fly by comparison with the British variants, and were they very different in terms of cockpit layout? I think most Phantoms marks feel the same. Pull the stick back, the nose goes up, you roll the stick to the left, it turns left. So in essence, the airplane feels the same. Were they different in terms of cockpit layout? There were the odd different switch, but nothing so different as something like the Hunter. That's one of the things I'll go back to about ground attack Hunters. No two Hunter cockpits, is the story, were the same. The switches which they added in were always in different places in different airplanes. The basic cockpit layout in all the F4s I ever flew was basically the same. Did I move on to the Freckle Pioneer again? Did you ever fly the F4E model of the Phantom? How did it fare compare with the Model C? No, I didn't. I flew the F4J, which was slightly different. That was the, I think it was the Navy F4E transferred to the RAF. A short answer to a short question. Zim Jang, what's the lowest altitude you will admit that you ever flown in the operation of a training sortie in the Phantom? Should we say very low? Very low indeed. Not as low as some of the very hairy stuff you see on YouTube. I think the lowest one ever flew with a Phantom comfortably was probably over the sea, particularly if there was a chop over the sea, because you could see very clearly what the ground was like, and it had the virtue, the surface of the sea, of being incredibly flat. So you could work your way down lower and lower and lower. Unlike my father, who I'll interject here, managed to fly low enough in a Spitfire to flatten the radiator that sits just outboard of the fuselage under the starboard wing. Very nearly killed on that sortie. And the lovely thing about World War II was the guy who, I'm digressing, but I hope you'll find it fun. The guy who he had to talk to afterwards, his flight commander, just wasn't fussed about it. This was in the middle of 1941. And the guy who talked to him about it, the flight commander, was a guy called Ginger Lacey, who was a flight lieutenant at the time with 2 distinguished flying medals, 28 kills to his name at the time, 5 of them in France before the Battle of Britain started. He bailed out twice, got shot down once, and nearly drowned in a lake in France. So when my father comes back with the aeroplane with a flattened radiator, he just treated it as a bit of a joke. His point was, the airplane's back, it's in one piece, we can fix the radiator. You're in one piece, you'd learn a lesson. Next question. I've digressed, but the answer is very low. Right, I'm losing track of where we are. MKMD exploration and paranormal. What was QRA like in the Falklands, other than drinking at the Queen Vic and burning pianos? There wasn't a Queen Vic when I was there. I didn't burn any pianos there. There weren't many. QRA in the Falklands was a pain in the, dare I say it, in the arse. The accommodation was pretty rough when I was there at Stanley. They were old sort of tin ISO containers converted. It was cold weather, so we were in our goon suits and trying to sleep with all that kit on, and knowing you had to rush out into the cold and black of the night in order to get into your airplane. It was a pretty unpleasant sight. Luckily, I was never scrambled at night in the Falklands. I wouldn't have wanted to be. Right, Hunter, side-by-side seating sometimes. A point about the Hunter 2-seater. I'm a man who enjoys beauty in all its forms. I don't think the Hunter 2-seater was as beautiful as the single-seater. So I'd always go for a single-seat Hunter over a 2-seater. Not a great answer to the question, but it's the best I can do. Hacken Feldman, this might not be within your area of expertise. Is the era of the stealth fighter coming to an end already due to modern sensors and radars? I think it's a good question. There was a story that when stealth fighters first came in, they were in fact visible to some electronics. And I think the answer to your question is that whenever you make an advance, there's always a countermeasure, followed by a countermeasure. So I think I'm going to answer your question by saying I don't think there will ever be absolute stealth. I'm going to move on. The Frecklebunnies are here again. Apart from firing a Sparrow Skyflash at 20 miles range, how would you best defeat a well-flown Hunter in close combat? And best method of defeating a Phantom in a Hunter. Let's take the last part first. To defeat a Phantom in a Hunter, you've got to get to him before he sees you. The great thing about the Hunter, it's got a magnificent radar. It looks up and it looks down. So the key will be to get there before he sees you on radar. That's almost incredibly difficult. Once you've got in close to him, if he's silly enough to stay and fight, you could outturn him, but he's got much more power than you, and he can sustain his turns longer than you. So if he's not at his best and underestimates your ability in a Hunter, you may get one shot very close with your 4 cannons, but you've probably got to get pretty close to do it. Not a great answer. I've never done Hunter against Phantoms, but that's the best I can offer you. Cody Stouffer, You got a great laugh out of me, sir. Believe me, I know all about the merits of washing my flight suit as we fly in Texas. Thank you for doing this and Godspeed. Well, there you go. Right. Zigzag ground zero, Hunter Phantom, high out, low level, flight handling conditions, speed handling, good, bad, and the ugly. Okay. The good things about handling the Phantom was forgiving. At high altitude, if you did something wrong, all else failed, you just let everything go. Take your hands off the stick and throttle and see what happens. And 9 times out of 10, it will recover. That doesn't work at low level, I'm afraid. So at low level, you just got to be careful not to get to the stage where you're at the buffet, and the Phantom will tell you you're at the buffet. If you're turning too hard, it will give you a rattle and a bang. If so quickly, so fast, you could mishandle the airplane to such an extent that it would flick, as something pretty basically wrong. On the Hunter, again, a very forgiving airplane. The only bad things about the Hunter, I think I've mentioned this before online, I'll be brief. Couldn't make it. It's because you're going too fast. There isn't enough airflow over the tailplane, so you've probably got the flaps down. So you just got to push up the knot. You've probably got 1 or 2 notches of flap down. You've been using it in combat. You pull up the flaps, then you'll be able to get enough airflow over the tailplane to recover from the dive. So that was the ugly bit about the Hunter. Lots of good about all of them. Not much bad. If you lost the Phantom in a spin, you had to pop the drag chute out the back. I never knew of anybody who did that. I didn't know one bloke who I was flying combat with him. Really, really lovely guy, and I usually was pretty even with him. On this particular day, he wasn't very good. I got behind him very easily, and said, "What's wrong?" And his lovely remark was, "I had a lot of trouble relighting the left engine." So he managed to blow the engine out by getting the engine at ramming it into full reheat or full power at a very high angle of attack and blowing the engine out. There's the good, bad, and the ugly. Right. Fog, Kral here. It's Germany, I gather. How did the backseat role change over time? Was there much focus on raw navigation, or were things fairly advanced already in terms of flight management systems where routes will be on display? In the F4, routes never on display. They were always done. When we started in the Phantom, they were always done on maps, compass, number of minutes on a certain heading, turn on another heading, and we used our map. So we didn't really have a nav system on the Phantom. Okay, where have I missed that? I may have moved out a bit. Two-seat Hunter have been a tandem-seater, would have been side-by-side, or did it make a difference performance-wise? Did side-by-side make better crew cooperation? Okay. The one thing I'll say about the two-seat Hunter, this is the Freckle Puny again, is you could fly it slower than a single-seater. It had a thing called area rule, which meant that you could get the airplane in a slow-speed scissors, single-seater against two-seater, and you could fly the two-seater slower, so that was better. Crew cooperation, you didn't really crew cooperate side by side. You taught and learnt. So I think, one behind the other for crew cooperation is fine. I'm going to move on. Xinjiang, what's the key to maximizing BFN in the Phantom? Was it a comfort in pushing the jet to its slower speeds, managing adverse yaw? Good question. The key to maximizing BFM in the Phantom was having, as someone used to call it, lots of smash. Keep the speed up. Use as much power as you can. Use the reheat. Get it going fast. And the faster you are, the safer you are. Was it comfort in pushing the jet to its slower speeds? Don't get the Phantom to slow speeds. No good. Adverse yaw. Yeah, you've got a bit of adverse yaw, but once you learn to recognize it, it wasn't a big issue. The big key was to keep the speed up in the F4. Ch, whoever that is. How would you compare Hunter versus F-86 Sabre? Can't do it. Get hold of a Pakistani or an Indian, I'm afraid. I can't do that one. Did you do DAST of the G91s? No, we didn't, I'm afraid, although they did fly out of Denchi with us. I'm moving fast now. Sergeant Lowell, what was standard operating procedure during a raid by enemy aircraft on an airfield? Don't be there, basically. Story about my father. He was raided in North Africa a lot by enemy aircraft. They learned two things. They didn't have anywhere to hide because they were intense. So the first thing they did was to dive into the holes made by the previous bombing raid. That made them fairly safe. They tried to avoid going into the ditches that were dug down to the airfield because they were full of fuel tanks. And there they went up. They killed you as well. So I'm rushing on. And the Falklands, just a Dutch guy in the Falklands win, would smoke your cigarette for you really quick, I heard. I didn't smoke, so I can't answer. Brockwell Lane, and I never would. Which marks of the Spitfire did your father fly, and have you ever flown one? Second question first. No, but I will when this friend of mine gets his Spitfire two-seater built, about 50 miles from me. He flew the one when he was learning, and then he flew the 5B and the tropical marked 5B in North Africa. MKMD Exploration and Paranormal. True story? Not sure about that one. Just a Dutch guy. Ole Lundfitz, what was your reaction to the Hunter Tower Bridge incident? Did you fly at the time, and did you share Pollock's frustration with the ministry? I knew Al Pollock very well. What was my reaction to the Hunter Tower Bridge incident? Part of me thought, absolutely brilliant, such fun, what a great guy, and what skill. Another part of me said, you've done that, Al, but you've probably got the Air Force in a deal of trouble, and you probably won't achieve what you want to do. One's always going to be frustrated with MOD. There's never enough money. There's never the right airplanes or enough of them. The business about working with MOD is frustration is the name of the game. It's not a perfect world. I think we all share frustration. I wouldn't have taken it to that extent. Callum 56, hang on. Did you ever get your golf slice sorted? No, I bloody well didn't, Callum, I'm afraid. And the best thing I did was to lose my golf clubs. They were stolen when I moved to Cheltenham, and I haven't sliced since. Bill W, 92 Best Fighter Squadron, without a question. Well done, Bill. Lovely quote from a fellow called Brian Kinkham, probably the finest fighter pilot the Air Force produced, but I'm biased. Someone once said he was 92 Squadron. He commanded it for about 2 or 3 months at the end of 41 as an acting boss. And then he went and commanded it again. And then he commanded 72 later on. It was the best in terms of the fighters' scores it achieved in World War II. And there's a quote in a book called Fighter Leader. I think it's called Fighter Leader by a fellow called Bob Oxspring, who retired as a group captain. This guy was my father's boss. He pays a tribute to Brian Kinkham because he took over 72 from Brian Kinkham. And he said, I inherited the best fighter squadron in the Air Force, thanks to Brian Kinkham. Kinkham was a very special guy. So you put Kinkham together with 92, yes, you've got the best squadron in the Air Force. But I'm biased. Sergeant Lau, how were you taught to avoid enemy radar while flying the Hunter? Fly as low as you possibly could is the answer, and that was fun. MKMD Exploration and Paranormal, what was the workload like in the Phantom? Entirely manageable because you had a backseater to help, except when you're trying to deliver bombs at night. The biggest workload I ever had on the Phantom was teaching someone to bomb at night in the back seat. Everyone always shouted out when you dived at the ground because you didn't want to hit it. And what I had to do was to press the guy in the front to keep on pointing at the ground until he got to about 400 feet in the pitch dark, and then pickle the bomb off and then pull out. But they always wanted to pull out early. That was the highest workload. And I suspect the backseater at night works hard as anyone. The Freckle Peony again. Give how many squadron types the RAF had in 1991. Do you think the RAF is too small today? Absolutely. The RAF is minimal. I haven't heard what the result of next week's figures on the size of the RAF Air Force are going to be. But we live in a different world, I think. We've got to accept that there's less money around, and the theory is these modern aeroplanes do so much more for the same amount of money. Not convinced. Hard to go further than that. Zigzag Ground Zero, thank you. Sergeant Lau, did you find any SEAD? Hang on, I just lost that one. There's an SEAD question which is gone. Forgive me. I'm going to have to do that. Which firearm did I carry in the cockpit of the Phantom? I didn't. Paraguay 76. Have I been to Larbrook? Yeah, I have. I used to fly tornadoes out of there. Xinjiang. What was it like to fly the Phantom in close formation, together managing boundary layer control and bleed air from nearby engines? I'm not a technical bloke, Xinjiang. The thing about flying close formation, the Phantom and anything else, in the Phantom you just put the light on the back of the wingtip and onto the star, or the air hole or bleed hole inside of the Phantom. You just put these two things together and you hung in there. And at night, all you did was to line up the right glow lights. So you don't think about any of those things other than keeping the airplane in the right place. As I say, I'm not technical, so boundary layer, control, and bleed for the birds. Hope that doesn't sound rude. What was my opinion, says Sergeant Lowell, on enemy aircraft, including the Su-27 flanker and the MiG-29? My opinion is that they're as good as the controllers who put them in the right place and the pilots who fly them. Yes, they'll have had missiles that are beyond visual range, but my worry would be if you put good GCI controllers and a good defense system electronically together, and then you gave them MiG-29s, and I think they'd be pretty fearsome. I always suspected the ability of the enemy to be as efficient as we were. Have I ever hit Mach 2 in the Phantom, says Bill? No. Kevin Houghton, do you require any academic qualifications or such as O or A levels to join as an aircrew officer? Yeah, I did, and I slipped through the net. I should have had 2 A levels. I have 1 and 2 O level passes, but there was an error with the typewriter. For those modern guys, a typewriter is an old machine that puts numbers and figures on a piece of paper. But I got to Cranwell by mistake. They thought I had 3 A levels. I had 1 and 2 O level passes. Honesty is the best policy, so I told them they'd made a mistake, and I tried to keep my nose clean.
So Black, I'm going to
I was lucky.
Sorry there, Black, I'm going to interrupt you there. So if you maybe pick 3 more questions that you can choose, and we're going to wrap up this brilliant Q&A. That'd be great.
Okay. There are 3 quick ones. I'm going to take one from Sergeant Lowell. Were you informed about the existence of the SR-71 Blackbird? I absolutely love it. Back to my point about if it looks right, it flies right. It's a beautiful aeroplane, and I knew nothing about it. Didn't need to know, but I think it's the most wonderful aeroplane. So there's the first question out the way. MKMD Exploration Paranormal. Do I have any memorable QRA stories? Probably, yeah, one. It's not a very good one. The one time I was scrambled in the Falklands on QRA, it was a complete disappointment because they'd picked up something that was coming in towards the Falklands. I was scrambled, and do you know what? There was nothing there. That's the biggest disappointment in my life. There I was scrambling, about to write, green writing in my logbook. An op sortie you fill in green nowadays, and there was nothing there. So that was my memorable QRA sortie. Nothing to it. Right. Let me just try and find one more. Here's one from Brockwell Lane. How difficult was it to learn air-to-air refueling? That's a good question to end on. You spend your life flying close formation, trying not to hit anything. And when you learn air-to-air refueling with the UK F4, with the probe and drogue system, you finally have to hit something in midair. The probe that comes out from where your right shoulder is in the cockpit and moves forward to where you can see it out of the corner of your right eye, you have to plant that into the basket being trailed behind the tanker. So the first difficult bit is to overcome the psychological barrier of hitting something in the air. The second bit is you stabilize behind the basket at about 9 or 10 feet, and you sit absolutely still. And then when you're still, you're stabilized, you then pour on the power gently and cruise forward. But as you move forward, the airflow from around the nose of the Phantom interferes with the basket itself, pushing it up and right, just a little. So you end up, and I'm not sure if you can see this on the screen, you end up trying to nudge it in with your right shoulder. So that's the nuts and bolts of learning to do air-to-air in the UK F4. It was different in America. You just formated on the aeroplane in front of you, who then beat you to death over the top of the cockpit with a system he just plugged in behind the back seater. You just had this banging on the cockpit. Right, that's about it. I hope I've answered all your questions. Mike, it's back to you.
Perfect. Well, what a great Q&A there, Black. And before we finish, let's talk about, so people can get your book, Fighters in the Blood. Where can we find it? I'm sure you have a copy available.
I've got 4 over my shoulder, and there's one of you can see it there. You can get it in 2 or 3 places. You can get hold of me, and I'll send you a signed copy. And if you haven't got my email address, Mike can give it to you, or you can connect to me through Facebook. You can get it on Amazon, Kindle or hardback, or you can get it through Pen and Sword. Find the best price.
Absolutely. And I saw one question there before we wrap up, Black, because you told me some great news today. Can you share with our viewers?
Okay. When I published this book, my publisher said, well, what are you going to do next? And I said, nothing, I'm going to retire. And the publisher said, well, you've got to do something else next. And I said, I have no imagination. I can't write another book. And he said, well, you've got to try. And then the first 2 comments I found, well, 2 of the first few comments I found on Amazon, people said, we'd like to have known a bit more about your father. So what I did was to decide to write a much more fulsome story about my father. I've got much more information than I had when I wrote this book. I've got 350 letters. I've got 60 pages of his notes that he dictated. And what I've done is I've told his story from a 23-year-old joining the Air Force far too late, meeting my mother at 15. She gets evacuated. He joins the Air Force. And I follow his story through her evacuating, him writing to her for 5 years on and off, him taking himself through to getting his wings, going onto a fighter squadron, getting shot down, following it through hospitals, 3 of them, 4 of them in North Africa, eventually coming back to the UK. So I tell his whole story with notes which expand what's in all his letters. And the nice thing is I don't use it like using the I word. And so to keep myself out of the book has been a pleasure. And I do appear once, though, on the 22nd of February 1945 at 7 pounds 14 ounces. A nice, healthy boy. It'll be published, Mike, at the end of next year.
Brilliant. Well, we'll keep you all updated on that, and I'll link Black's latest book, Fighters in the Blood, in the description below. But thank you very much for Black for coming on for this Q&A, and all you guys coming in, and especially our patrons. So I hope you enjoyed it, but have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. But thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you, Mike.